its large windows glowing every evening as young students practiced scales and melodies. Inside those walls, dreams were shaped into sound. Every note, every lesson, was a step toward greatness for the students who hoped to perform on the grandest stages one day. In the last row of the academy hall, a girl sat quietly, away from the chatter and shining eyes of others. Her name was Amina. She was 16, with skin as dark as polished wood and eyes that carried no light. Since birth, she had been blind. To many, her cloudy eyes meant weakness, but to her, they were simply a part of life. She had learned to live in the dark with grace. Though she could not see, Amina's world was full. She recognized the world through sounds: the clink of shoes against marble floors, the whisper of pages turning, the way a note trembled before fading away. Music was her guide, her teacher, and her only escape. At home, she had an old upright piano, scratched and worn, but when her fingers touched its keys, the world became wider and brighter. She played not by following notes on paper but by listening, feeling, and letting her heart speak. Her mother often stood at the door while Amina played, her eyes wet with pride, knowing her daughter was made of something extraordinary. But in the academy, the story was different. Here, Amina was seen as an outsider. Students whispered whenever she walked by. They pitied her, but their pity was mixed with doubt and sometimes cruelty. To them, a blind girl had no place in a world where reading sheet music and memorizing notes were the golden rules. Among the students, one name carried more weight than any other: Armin. He was 20, already a star in newspapers and concerts. His family was wealthy, and he had trained since childhood under the best teachers. His fingers moved across the piano like a storm, fast and powerful, and audiences adored him. He was proud, confident, and carried himself like someone untouchable. Amina had heard him play many times from afar. His music was strong, perfect in technique, but cold, like a machine that knew all the right steps but none of the feelings. Still, the students worshipped him, copying his style and cheering whenever he entered the hall. One afternoon, the large hall filled with students. The teacher, a kind but strict man, gathered them for a practice session. Amina came too, her cane tapping softly as she made her way to a chair near the piano. She sat quietly, folding her hands in her lap, her black dress flowing around her ankles. The whispers began almost at once. "Why is she even here?" someone murmured. "She cannot read music. What is the use? Maybe she only came to listen because that's all she can do." Their words floated through the air like sharp needles. Amina lowered her head, but her face remained calm. She had heard worse before. Armin sat at the grand piano, his polished shoes shining, his posture straight. He glanced at her with a half smile, a smile not of kindness but of mockery. Pressing a few playful keys, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Music is not for everyone. Some people are born to play, others are born to listen. That is how life works." The hall burst into laughter. Amina's hands tightened around her cane. She said nothing, but inside, her chest burned. She wanted to show them she was more than a listener. The teacher silenced the noise and asked Armin to play first. With a nod, Armin began. His fingers struck the keys with speed and power, each note precise, each chord perfectly measured. The sound filled the hall like thunder rolling across mountains. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Students clapped with excitement, their eyes wide with admiration. But Amina tilted her head slightly as she listened. The performance was flawless, but empty. She could feel no warmth in it, no story, no soul. Then the teacher turned his gaze toward Amina. "Would you like to try?" he asked gently. The room grew still. Some students snickered, covering their mouths. Armin leaned back, folding his arms. "She cannot even see the keys," he whispered, and a few laughed again. But Amina stood. Her heart beat loudly, but her steps were steady. She touched the smooth edge of the piano, found the bench, and sat. For a moment, the world was silent, only her breath filling her ears. She lifted her hands and placed them lightly on the keys. Then she began to play. It was not a grand piece, not one from a famous composer. It was something her own heart had created, shaped through years of listening, dreaming, and feeling. The melody was soft, like a breeze passing through a quiet forest, but each note carried weight, truth, and warmth. The sound touched something inside everyone present. Students who had laughed now sat frozen. Some felt tears rise without knowing why. The teacher's stern eyes softened as he listened. Even the walls seemed to breathe slower, as if the music had cast a spell. Armin uncrossed his arms, his smirk vanishing. For the first time, a note had pierced through his pride. When the last chord faded, silence filled the hall. Nobody spoke. The sound of Amina's music still lingered, as though the piano itself refused to let it go. Amina rose, cane in hand. Without a word, she returned to her seat. And in that heavy silence, everyone knew something had changed forever. The next morning, the academy was buzzing. The students had gathered in small groups, whispering about what they had heard the previous day. No one could stop talking about the blind girl's music. Amina played as if the piano was alive, one student said. It was like the song had feelings, another added. But she didn't even read notes. How can that be possible, someone else wondered. For many, it was the first time they realized music could be more than speed, more than perfection. It could be a story told without words. But not everyone was pleased. Armin walked through the hallways with his usual confidence, but inside, something was unsettled. The memory of Amina's music echoed in his mind like a stubborn shadow. He tried to brush it off, telling himself her piece was simple, unpolished, something anyone could play. Yet, the truth was different. He had never felt that kind of connection from his own performances. Armin's pride burned. For years, he had been called a prodigy. Crowds clapped for him, teachers praised him, and his name had traveled beyond the academy walls. But one song from a blind girl had shaken his throne of perfection. That afternoon, during practice, Armin avoided looking at her. Amina, on the other hand, sat quietly as always. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile at the whispers in her favor. She simply listened, her head tilted, as if the piano itself was speaking secrets only she could hear. The teacher noticed the change in the room. He looked at Armin, then at Amina. He understood something had begun between them, something that could not be stopped. So he made a decision. Next week, the teacher announced, we will hold a small concert in this hall. Each of you will play one piece. It will not be a competition, but a chance to show what you have learned. Your families and friends will be invited. The students cheered. Some began planning what they would play. But Armin's gaze fell on Amina. He wanted her to stay silent, to refuse, to step back into the shadows. But when the teacher asked if she wished to perform, Amina nodded gently. Yes, she said softly. Her voice was calm, but it carried a quiet determination. Armin clenched his fists. That evening, Amina sat at the old piano in her small house. Her mother brought her a cup of tea and touched her shoulder. "You played beautifully yesterday," her mother whispered. "People will finally know what I have always known, that your gift is rare." Amina smiled. "But they only laughed before. They will laugh less and listen more now," her mother said with warmth. Amina touched the keys, letting her fingers wander. She didn't have sheet music, only her heart. She closed her eyes, though closed or open, her world was the same, and imagined the hall again. She imagined Armin's cold, sharp notes, then remembered the silence after her own song. That silence had been filled with more truth than any applause. She began to shape a new melody, something stronger than before, something that would speak of her struggle, her loneliness, and her hope. Meanwhile, Armin locked himself in the academy practice room late into the night. His fingers flew across the keys, faster and louder than ever. He chose a difficult piece, one that would impress the audience with speed and precision. He told himself it would crush whatever Amina planned to play. But each time he paused, her music crept back into his thoughts. It wasn't the notes, it was the way she had made people feel. He hated to admit it, but in all his years, he had never seen listeners go silent like that. His applause had been loud, yes, but her silence had been heavier. He shook his head and played harder, trying to drown her memory in his own storm of sound. The week passed quickly. On the day of the concert, the hall filled with families and guests. The air was thick with excitement. Students whispered nervously as they waited for their turn. Amina sat in the corner, her cane resting against her chair, her hands folded in her lap. She could hear the shuffling of shoes, the coughs, the hushed voices. She imagined the size of the crowd and felt her chest tighten. When her turn came, she rose slowly. The hall grew quiet. Some people in the audience looked at her with curiosity, others with doubt. How could a blind girl perform without music sheets? Amina walked to the piano, guided by her cane. She sat, adjusted herself, and touched the keys gently, like greeting an old friend. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her fingers began to move. Her melody rose softly, almost like a whisper, then grew stronger, fuller. It was not loud, but it was alive. Each note carried her heart, the pain of being mocked, the loneliness of her dark world, and the strength she had built inside. The audience listened in silence. A mother in the front row held her child closer, an old man closed his eyes, and even the restless students forgot to fidget. The music wrapped around them like a story, telling them what words could never say. When the last note faded, the silence was deep. Then, slowly, the hall erupted into applause, louder than anyone had expected. Some stood to clap, their eyes shining. From the side of the stage, Armin watched. His face was hard, but his heart was shaken again. He had played faster, louder, stronger than anyone, but she had played truth. And for the first time in his life, Armin felt afraid. The concert at the academy had ended, but its memory stayed alive. For days, people spoke about the blind girl who had played as if her heart had spilled into every note. The audience members carried the story to their families, and soon Amina's name began to move quietly from one street to another, like a secret too beautiful to hide. Students who had once whispered cruelly about her now looked at her differently. When she entered the hall, they no longer laughed. Some still doubted her, but others began to greet her softly, even offering to help guide her. Amina accepted their kindness with a small smile, but inside she knew their change was not because of pity, it was because they had heard what she truly carried. Armin, however, could not accept it? His pride had been wounded, and though no one spoke it aloud, he felt the shift. He had always been the star, the one everyone admired. Now, when people mentioned music in the academy, they mentioned her name too. Amina. One afternoon, as students gathered around her after class, asking how she had learned to play without notes, Armin watched from a distance. His jaw tightened. He wanted to remind them who he was, to remind them that his skill was unmatched. That evening, Armin stayed late in the practice room again. His fingers raced across the keys with fiery speed, filling the empty hall with sound. But no matter how hard he struck the piano, he could not erase the memory of her song. His music was powerful, yes, but hers had been alive. He stopped, leaning forward with his head in his hands. For the first time, Armin felt a fear he had never known, the fear of being forgotten. While Armin wrestled with his pride, Amina found peace at her old piano at home. Her mother often sat nearby, sewing or listening quietly. Amina played for hours, letting melodies flow out of her without thought. "You are different, my child," her mother said one night, her voice soft. "You don't only play notes. You play the soul of life itself." Amina smiled. "I only play what I feel, Mama. The world is full of sounds. I just let them speak." Her mother touched her hand. "One day, the world will hear you." Amina did not dream of fame. All she wanted was to play, to share her heart. But her mother's words settled deep inside her. Perhaps, one day, the world would listen. A few days later, the academy teacher entered the hall with exciting news. "There will be a regional music event next month," he announced. "Young performers from different academies will take part. I want some of you to represent us." The hall filled with excited chatter. This was not a small concert, it was a stage where critics, artists, and reporters often came. Winning or even performing there could open doors to greater opportunities. The teacher looked at the students one by one. Then his eyes stopped on two people, Armin and Amina. "I will send both of you," he said. The room fell silent. Some students gasped, others exchanged glances. Armin's face turned cold. He wanted to protest, but the teacher's word was final. After class, Armin approached the teacher privately. "Why her?" he asked, his tone sharp. "She cannot even read notes. This is a serious stage, not a place for experiments." The teacher's gaze was steady. "Armin, she may not read notes, but she speaks a language of music you have not yet learned. The stage is not only for perfection. It is for truth. And she has it." Armin's fists clenched, but he said nothing. In the weeks that followed, the academy buzzed with preparation. Students practiced harder than ever, but all eyes often turned to the two chosen performers. Amina remained calm, her practice filled with patience and feeling. Armin grew restless, pushing himself to greater speed and difficulty, desperate to outshine her. One evening, as Amina left the academy, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Armin. "You think you impressed them with your little song," he said, his voice low, almost bitter. "But on the real stage, you will fail. The world is not kind to dreamers who cannot even see the keys." Amina turned her head toward his voice. Her expression was calm, though her heart beat fast. "Maybe," she said softly. "But the world listens to the heart more than the eyes. And my heart will speak." For a moment, Armin had no reply. Her words struck deeper than he expected. He turned sharply and walked away, his pride burning hotter. The day of the regional event finally arrived. The grand hall was larger than anything Amina had ever entered. She could not see the tall ceilings or the golden lights, but she felt the size of the space through sound, the echo of footsteps, the hush of the crowd, the distant clearing of throats. Her mother held her hand tightly before she went backstage. "Remember, child, you do not play to impress. You play to speak. Let them hear you." Amina nodded. Her fingers itched for the keys. She could already feel the melody waiting inside her, ready to flow. From across the stage curtain, Armin watched her. His chest tightened with a mix of anger and something else he could not name. Fear, perhaps. But one thing was certain: he would not let her take the spotlight without a fight. And so, the battle of music was set to begin. The regional music event was more than just a gathering of young talents. It was a place where future stars were discovered. The grand hall glittered with lights, and rows of chairs filled with families, teachers, musicians, and critics. The stage itself shone under golden lamps, holding a polished grand piano at its center like a throne waiting for its ruler. Backstage, the performers whispered nervously. Some held their sheet music tightly, others stretched their fingers again and again. Amina sat quietly in her corner, her cane resting beside her. She did not hold sheet music. Her world had no written notes, only the melodies inside her heart. Her mother leaned close and touched her shoulder. "Be calm, child. Let the piano carry your truth." Amina nodded, her fingers gently brushing against the wooden bench. She was nervous, but her nervousness was not about failure. It was about being heard. She wanted the music to reach people's hearts, just as it had in the academy. Armin stood not far from her, his chest rising with pride. He had chosen one of the most difficult pieces ever written, a piece filled with speed and technical power. He had practiced until his hands hurt, determined to make the crowd forget about the blind girl. He glanced at her and smirked. To him, this stage was his kingdom, and she was only an intruder. The event began. One by one, students from different academies stepped onto the stage. Some played beautifully, earning polite applause. Others stumbled, their nervousness overtaking their skill. The audience listened, clapped, and waited for something that would move them. Then the announcer called Armin's name. The hall filled with whispers. Many had heard of him already, the young prodigy, the rising star. He stepped onto the stage with perfect confidence, his suit crisp, his steps measured. When he sat at the piano, his back was straight, his hands ready like a soldier before battle. He began to play. The notes came fast, powerful, and flawless. His fingers flew across the keys like lightning, his chords crashed like thunder. The hall shook with sound, and the audience sat in awe of his technique. Every note was perfect, every run was sharp. By the time he finished, the hall erupted in applause. Some even stood to cheer. Armin rose and bowed, pride shining in his eyes. He looked toward the audience, searching for the recognition he believed belonged to him. But when the noise faded, and the announcer called the next name, a different kind of silence fell. Amina. The blind girl stood. The hall shifted uneasily. Some people leaned forward, curious. Others raised their brows. How would a girl who could not even see the piano compete with what they had just heard? Amina walked slowly, her cane tapping softly against the floor. She found her way to the piano and sat. The audience watched closely. Armin stood at the side of the stage, arms crossed, his smirk returning. For a moment, the hall was utterly quiet. Amina touched the keys, her hands resting gently. She took a breath, closed her eyes though her world was always dark, and began to play. The first notes were soft, like the gentle opening of dawn. They were not fast, not heavy, but they carried a warmth that spread quietly through the hall. Then the melody deepened, weaving into layers of sadness, hope, and beauty. It was not a piece from any composer's book. It was her own story, the story of being different, being mocked, being lonely, yet still rising through the silence. The audience leaned in, forgetting to breathe. A child in the front row rested her head on her mother's shoulder, eyes half closed. An old man wiped at his face. Even the critics, known for their cold hearts, sat frozen. Amina's fingers moved with grace, not with force. She did not fight the piano, she spoke with it. Each note was a word, each pause was a tear, each rise was a hope. The sound filled not only the hall but also the souls of those who listened. Armin, from the side, felt his chest tighten. He had played faster, louder, stronger, but what she played was alive. She was not showing skill. She was showing her heart. And he knew the truth, no speed could defeat such truth. When the final note faded, silence followed. A silence so deep it felt like the world itself was listening. Then, slowly, the applause began. It grew louder, louder still, until the hall thundered not with notes but with claps and cheers. People rose to their feet. Some shouted her name. Amina lowered her head gently, stood, and felt her way back with her cane. She did not need to see the faces, she could feel the waves of love in the air. Her mother met her backstage with tears in her eyes, hugging her tightly. "They heard you, my child," she whispered. "The world has begun to hear you." That night, the judges announced their thoughts. Both Armin and Amina were praised, but the whispers in the crowd told the true story. The boy had impressed. The girl had touched. Reporters approached her teacher. "Who is this blind girl? Where has she come from?" And so, Amina's name began to rise beyond the academy, beyond the city. She was no longer the quiet girl in the corner. She was the girl who played what the world had forgotten, music with a soul. Armin, standing alone in the shadows, clenched his fists. He had not been defeated on the stage, but in the hearts of people, he had lost. And for a proud pianist like him, that loss was heavier than any silence. After the regional event, the city seemed to carry Amina's music like a whisper on the wind. People who had been in the hall could not stop speaking about her. They described her performance to friends, neighbors, and even strangers. She was blind, they said, but her fingers sang as if they could see more than eyes ever could. Soon, newspapers carried her story. Small articles appeared with titles like "The Blind Girl Who Stole the Stage" or "Music from the Heart." A picture of her sitting at the piano, her head tilted, her hands resting on the keys, spread through the city. In the academy, students who once mocked her now looked at her with respect. They asked her questions, sought her advice, and even invited her to sit with them. Amina was humble. She answered softly, never raising her voice. She knew the attention was not about her but about the music she carried. Her mother, however, glowed with pride. She often folded the newspapers neatly and placed them in a drawer, saving each one like a treasure. "One day, you will see," her mother whispered, "your music will go further than even these pages." But not everyone celebrated. Armin sat in his practice room, staring at the piano. The applause he had received at the regional event still rang in his ears, but beside it was something louder, the thunder of the audience for Amina. He remembered the silence that had fallen before her applause, a silence that had felt heavier than any storm. He played furiously, trying to drown the memory. His hands moved faster, louder, but no matter how strong his notes were, they sounded empty to him. The more he tried, the more hollow they felt. One evening, his teacher entered the room. "Armin," the teacher said gently, "you play with great skill, but skill alone is not enough. Music is not a race of speed. It is a mirror of the soul." Armin snapped, "And what does she have that I do not? She cannot even see the keys." The teacher looked at him steadily. "She has what you hide feeling. Until you learn to play with your heart, you will always lose to her, even if your fingers are faster." The words struck him, but instead of softening, they hardened his pride. He pushed the piano lid down with force. "I will not lose," he muttered. Meanwhile, invitations began to arrive at Amina's home. Small concerts, charity events, and gatherings wanted her to play. Her teacher guided her, reminding her to balance her studies with her performances. At her first small concert outside the academy, the hall was filled with people she had never met. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt their eyes on her. Some doubted, some pitied, but by the end of her first song, the hall was united in silence, then in applause. Word spread further. Radio hosts began to mention her name, saying, "There is something different in her music. It is not learned, it is lived." Amina, however, remained calm. She did not dream of fame. She only dreamed of touching hearts. Each time she played, she thought of her mother sitting in the audience, smiling with tears in her eyes. That was enough. But Armin's world darkened. He still performed, still impressed audiences, but the sparkle around his name dimmed. Whenever people spoke of young talents, they compared him to Amina. Some said, "Armin is brilliant, but Amina makes us feel." These words stung more than knives. At night, he walked through the city streets, hearing her name whispered in tea shops, in markets, even by street musicians. One evening, after a performance where the applause felt polite rather than passionate, Armin sat alone in his dressing room. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. His hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emptiness. He whispered to himself, "What am I missing?" The mirror gave no answer. At the academy, destiny brought them face to face again. Amina entered the hall with her cane, her steps steady. Armin was already at the piano, practicing a storm of notes. The sound was sharp, almost angry. When he noticed her, he stopped. Silence filled the space between them. "You are enjoying all the praise," Armin said bitterly. Amina tilted her head toward his voice. "I do not play for praise. I play because my heart has something to say." Her words were gentle, but they cut deep. Armin wanted to argue, to remind her of his years of training, his countless hours of practice, his fame. But in that moment, he realized none of it mattered to her. She did not compete with him, she simply existed in her own music. He turned away, his pride too heavy to let him admit what he felt. That night, while Amina practiced at home, her mother listened quietly from the door. The melody Amina played was tender, almost like a prayer. Her mother closed her eyes and whispered, "The world will not only hear her. The world will need her." And far away, in his lonely room, Armin played too loud, fast, desperate. But no matter how hard he struck the keys, the piano refused to speak. The echo of Amina's song still haunted him, and deep inside, he began to fear something he never imagined before, that she was not only his rival but also the mirror of everything he lacked. The city could no longer contain Amina's music. What began as whispers in small halls grew into a voice that reached across towns and borders. Letters came from other countries, written in languages her mother could barely understand, but the meaning was always clear: we want to hear her. One morning, her teacher visited with exciting news. "Amina," he said softly, "you have been invited to perform at the Grand International Music Festival. It is the largest stage you can imagine. Musicians from all over the world will play there." Amina sat quietly, holding her cane. She could not see his shining eyes, but she felt the weight of the moment. "Do you think I am ready?" she asked. Her teacher smiled. "You were ready the day you touched the piano for the first time. The world is only just beginning to listen." Her mother squeezed her hand with pride. "Go, my child. Show them that the heart does not need sight to see." While the news spread like fire through the city, Armin heard it too. He was in his practice hall when a student ran in, saying, "Did you hear? Amina has been chosen to represent our country at the festival." The words struck Armin harder than any storm. That festival had been his dream since he was a child. He had imagined standing on that stage, dazzling the world, proving himself as a legend. And now, the dream was given to the very girl he once mocked. That night, Armin sat at the piano until his fingers hurt. He played piece after piece, fast, complex, brilliant. But every note felt empty. No matter what he tried, he could not escape the thought of her name being announced on that grand stage instead of his. For the first time, tears slipped down his face. He hated the weakness, but he could not stop them. "Why her?" he whispered. "Why not me?" Days passed quickly. Amina prepared with calm focus. She practiced not to impress but to carry her feelings into the keys. Each piece she chose was like a story from her life, the sound of her childhood, the voice of her struggles, the warmth of her mother's hands guiding her through darkness. The festival was held in a vast hall in another country. The journey itself was overwhelming for her. Airplanes, hotels, foreign voices, all new and strange. But through it all, she held her mother's hand and trusted her teacher's guidance. When she finally stepped into the grand hall for rehearsal, she paused. She could not see the thousands of seats, the golden lights, or the high ceiling, but she felt the size of the place in her chest. It was like standing inside the heart of the world. Her teacher whispered, "Do not think of the hall. Think only of the music. Let it be your eyes." She nodded and touched the piano gently, as if greeting an old friend. Meanwhile, Armin made a bold decision. Though not invited to perform, he traveled to the festival as part of the audience. He told no one. He wanted to see with his own eyes the girl who had stolen what he believed was his destiny. When he entered the grand hall on the final evening, the seats were filled with people from every corner of the world. Famous names, critics, and musicians sat waiting. He felt small among them, but his pride still burned. The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed, "Now, from a small city far away, we welcome a young pianist whose story has already touched many hearts, Amina." The hall burst into applause as Amina walked slowly onto the stage, guided by her cane. Armin's heart pounded. Watching her, he felt anger, envy, and something else, an unease he could not name. Amina sat at the piano. The hall grew silent, so silent that even the sound of her breath could be heard. She placed her fingers on the keys and began. Her music was unlike anything the hall had ever known. It was not only a performance, it was a journey. Each note carried pieces of her life, the struggles of walking through darkness, the laughter she shared with her mother, the loneliness she felt when mocked, and the quiet strength she found in herself. People listened with open hearts. Some closed their eyes and felt tears roll down their cheeks. Others leaned forward, afraid to miss even a single note. By the time she ended, the silence was so deep that it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then, thunderous applause filled the hall. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even shouting her name. Amina only smiled softly, bowing her head. She could not see the standing ovation, but she could hear and feel it. In the audience, Armin was frozen. He had expected to find flaws, to prove to himself that she did not deserve this stage. Instead, he felt something he had never felt before. He was moved. Her music had reached him, piercing through his pride like light through glass. For the first time in his life, he understood what his teacher had tried to tell him. Music was not about showing power or speed. It was about touching hearts. And Amina had touched his. He lowered his head, ashamed. The applause around him sounded like thunder, but in his heart, there was silence. He whispered to himself, "I was wrong." That night, Amina became more than a name from a small city. She became a voice for countless people who believed they were unseen, unheard, or underestimated. Her music traveled across borders, through radios and screens, and into the souls of millions. And somewhere in that same city where her journey began, a proud pianist named Armin began to question everything he once believed about greatness. Because greatness, he now realized, was not in the hands, but in the heart. The night of the festival never faded from memory. News channels carried Amina's performance across countries. Clips of her sitting calmly at the piano, her eyes closed, her fingers moving like gentle rivers, spread from city to city. People spoke not only about her talent but about her courage. They said, "This girl cannot see the world, but she makes us see ourselves." Her music became more than sound, it became a message of hope. When Amina returned home, she was welcomed like a hero. Crowds gathered at the airport, holding flowers, cheering her name. Children reached for her hand, mothers blessed her, and even old men wiped tears from their eyes. Her mother held her tightly in the middle of the crowd. "You have made them all believe again," she whispered. Amina smiled softly. "I only gave them what was already in my heart." In the weeks that followed, invitations poured in from everywhere: concert halls, cultural festivals, universities, and even hospitals. Letters came from people who had never touched a piano in their lives but who felt healed just listening to her recordings. One letter was from a young boy who was also blind. He wrote, "When I hear your music, I no longer feel broken. I feel strong." Amina cried when her mother read those words aloud. She realized her journey was no longer about her alone, it was about giving strength to others. But far away, Armin lived in silence. He could not escape the memory of her performance. It played again and again in his mind, not like a wound but like a lesson. For weeks, he did not touch his piano. The instrument that once felt like a crown now felt like a mirror, showing him the emptiness inside. One evening, his teacher visited. The old man looked at him kindly and said, "You are lost, Armin." Armin lowered his eyes. "I thought music was about being the best. I thought if I could play faster, louder, more perfectly, then I would win. But I was wrong. She showed me that music is about giving, not taking." The teacher nodded. "Then learn from her. Pride is heavy, but humility can carry you further than talent alone." Those words planted a seed in his heart. Months passed, and Amina's name grew brighter. She was invited to play at the capital's Royal Hall, a place where only legends had ever performed. The event was to be broadcast live to the world. The hall was filled with leaders, scholars, artists, and ordinary people who had traveled days just to hear her. The lights dimmed, and silence covered the hall like a blanket. As Amina walked slowly to the piano, guided by her cane, she whispered to herself, "This is not my song alone. It belongs to every heart that listens." She began to play. The melody was gentle at first, like a breeze through leaves. Then it grew deeper, richer, like waves rising in the sea. It carried sorrow and joy, despair and hope. It carried the voice of every person who had ever felt unseen. People in the hall wept openly. The music did not just enter their ears, it entered their lives. And in the very back of the hall, almost hidden in the shadows, Armin sat quietly. He had come not as a rival but as a listener. As her final note faded, the hall exploded in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping until their hands ached. But Amina only bowed her head humbly, whispering, "Thank you." When the crowd finally settled, something unexpected happened. The host of the event stepped forward and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we also welcome another pianist who has a message to share. Please, give your attention to Armin." A gasp spread through the hall. Many remembered the young man who had once been known for his pride. Armin walked slowly to the piano. He sat, his hands trembling slightly. He glanced at Amina, who was seated nearby. Though she could not see him, she seemed to sense his presence. She nodded gently, as if giving him silent permission. He began to play, not fast, not loud, but soft, with honesty. For the first time in his life, he played without pride. The music carried apology, longing, and new understanding. The audience listened in surprise. They had never heard this side of him before. When he finished, there was a pause, then warm applause, not as thunderous as Amina's, but filled with respect. Armin stood and bowed his head toward her. "Thank you," he whispered. Amina smiled. Music is not about winning or losing. It is about sharing. Tonight, you shared. From that day on, the world spoke of two pianists, one who taught them to believe, and another who learned to change. Amina continued to travel, filling halls with her music, inspiring those who felt forgotten. Armin rebuilt himself, learning humility and using his gift to teach children who dreamed of music. And though their paths were different, their songs carried the same message: greatness is not measured by fame or skill but by the hearts you touch. Years later, when people remembered the girl who once stood mocked in a quiet academy hall, they did not recall the laughter of those who doubted her. They remembered the way she played, the way she made the world stop and listen. Her blindness never limited her. Instead, it taught the world to see.